Now let's look at this example. We have a load of 100 megawatts where Gen A and Gen B, Gen A is 250 megawatts, Gen B is 50 megawatts, and Gen A has a cost of 1,000 where Gen B has a cost of, or a price. When we say price, is peso per the unit of measure, which is peso per price over a unit of measure, which is peso per megawatt hour in this case. When we say cost, it should be in the unit of only the money or peso only. So Gen A based on price is cheaper than Gen B. So Gen A can actually provide all the requirement of the load because it's 250 megawatts. It can provide 100 megawatt, the 100 megawatt requirement for the load. Now that's neglecting losses. However, let's say the capacity of the line is only 75 megawatts. Um, that 100 megawatts that is being scheduled for Gen A obviously cannot all cross from his location to the load. So Gen A will now be scheduled down from 100 and ramped down to 75, and where we're trying to maximize the capacity. But the loads requirement again is still 100, so we have to increase 100. We have to increase now the requirement for, we have to meet the requirement for the load of 100. So Gen B now has to be scheduled by 25. So Gen A is 75, Gen B is 25 to again avoid line overloading. So what's the issue with line overloading? Well, if you have a line that's overloaded, we have protection schemes in the transmission or even in the distribution systems that will avoid overloading the line because it's equivalent to, again, much current will be equivalent to heat. So to protect itself, that line will eventually trip. Now what will happen is instead of having stable power, we will eventually result to the worst case, which is blackout. Now once it's done, you finalize the generator schedules, and then the system planner will provide all the generators their respective megawatt schedules for each hour of the next day. Again, these are just schedules, and in real time, it will be managed by the system operator. Should the real time in real time changes in system demand or even the system condition happen, the system operator has to adjust, either use ancillary services or eventually ramp up available capacities or ramp down scheduled capacities already. Um, as was stated, in real time, the system operator will be managing dispatches of generating plants, both energy outputs and ancillary service dispatch commands. Commands for dispatch outputs of generating plants again are based on that generator schedules from the day ahead, whereas the system operator shall also utilize ancillary services. The most common of them are regulation and contingency ancillary services to ensure always that there's balance between supply and demand. Now, after the fact, all generation outputs are obviously recorded in what we call revenue meters for a certain period of time. Okay, so those actual megawatt hour, now this is energy. When we say megawatt hour, it's energy. So that energy that was eventually produced by a generator for that period of time uh, will be multiplied by their generation rate to eventually arrive at their production cost. Other costs such as startup or shutdown cost, no load cost, manpower cost, ancillary service capacity cost shall also be taken into account. And all these costs shall be recovered by NPC to the consumers through their distribution utilities, which also act as their suppliers. Now you pass it on to the distribution utilities, or the electric cooperatives, and the DUs or ECs as we call them, We'll have to add up obviously some charges as well, which they call distribution charge. It takes into account obviously all the other costs that the distribution utility incurred during that time, which involves obviously manpower, maintenance, obviously some profit or reasonable profit for maintaining that system. They'll add it up to the cost that was passed on to them by NPC, and eventually that rate will now be recovered to the individual consumers. Now, how does the Philippine power system look? That was then. How about now? How does it look? The Philippine power system, um, there's already a lot of generation companies available. Um, Electricity tariffs are already unbundled for more transparency. The high voltage transmission line is now opened up. We call it open access, so that distributors and large consumers have fair access to those lines, um, particularly at the end, where the distribution lines were eventually opened up for contestable end users. Now, on the other end, that will result to um, we still have regulated transmission and distribution sectors, because again, you can't have a lot of operators managing the system. Like let's say the transmission system cannot be managed by many or a lot of entities. That goes the same when power is delivered to a delivery station, which eventually will be managed by a distribution utility. That franchise area being managed by the distribution utility cannot be operated by more than one entity. So that's for the service of maintaining or delivering power. But who sells you that power? Um, there's a lot of competitive electricity service providers. Now we call them retail electricity suppliers, which you now can choose uh, from among a lot of suppliers that consumers can choose, um, so that it's you get the best price for your electricity consumption. The Luzon Grid looks like this right now. The Luzon Grid is composed of majority of a 230 kV transmission system, but its backbone or the voltage level that delivers bulk or a majority of the power is a 500 kV lines. Eventually, those are delivered to distribution utilities or electric cooperatives that have voltage levels at 69 kV. But one of our largest distribution utility in the Luzon, which is Meralco or Manila Electric, which manages 70% of the Luzon Grid's consumption, particularly out of within that 70% already portion of that, which is the 50% portion, is Metro Manila. So half of the Luzon Grid's consumption is being consumed in Metro Manila alone, which is obviously managed by Meralco. Um, their franchise, because of that high amount of power, their franchise is at 115 kV. The Visayas Grid is composed of 5 major islands. Um, the 5 major islands are Leyte, Samar, Cebu, Negros, Bohol, and Panay, and they're all interconnected by AC submarine cables, and they are right now radially connected. Majority of the lines in Visayas, because it has a lower demand requirement, is 138 kV. Although there's a setup for 230 kV to carry power, large amount of power from Leyte to Cebu, because there's a large capacity from Leyte, a geothermal facility that can transmit power to Cebu, which is the load center in Visayas. Um, Eventually, demand is growing in Visayas, and there's a project upcoming there that eventually will utilize more 230 kV lines. Now, the Visayas grid is also interconnected with the Luzon grid through an HVDC link. It's a 350 kV HVDC line, which is bipolar, which can transmit from one direction to another. The Mindanao grid, on the other hand, has 6 areas, and majority of them also are 138 kV lines. It has almost the same demand requirement as Visayas, but given the increasing demand also in Mindanao, there's a lot of upcoming projects that will involve new 230 kV substations and lines in the Mindanao grid up to 2022. Now, some important notes. As of 2019, peak demand per grid in Luzon per grid in Luzon, there's 11,300 megawatts now as peak demand. Visayas, there's more than 2,190 megawatts, where um, in Mindanao, we have 2,000 plus megawatts. Again, as mentioned before, the main power system characteristics in Luzon, the main transmission system is 230 kV, backbone is 500 kV, and the load center is in Metro Manila. In Visayas, the main transmission system is 138 kV, is comprised of 5 major islands, and the load center is in Cebu. In Mindanao, main transmission system is 138 kV. Right now, a lot of the power requirements are either in Cagayan de Oro or in Davao City in Mindanao. Now that ends the presentation for this part of our lecture.